How do you bring it home to them? By an inspiration? By a vision? A dream? Brothers, people, why has life been given you? In the deep, deaf stillness of midnight, the doors of the death cells are being swung open, and the great souled people are being dragged out to be shot.
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn was born in 1918 in southern Russia, just after the Bolshevik Revolution. His father died before he was born, leaving his mother to raise him alone in a country torn apart by war and poverty. A gifted student, Solzhenitsyn excelled in school and became a teacher and a writer. When World War II began, he joined the Red Army, serving as an artillery officer on the front lines. But in 1945, everything changed. Solzhenitsyn was arrested for criticizing Stalin in a private letter to a friend. He was sentenced to 8 years in the Gulag, Soviet labor camps designed to crush the human body and spirit and make them compliant. For the first 3 years, he was sent to the brutal labor camps where he hauled heavy loads, endured freezing conditions, and watched fellow prisoners die of starvation and abuse. These were years of bitterness and disillusionment. He had been a loyal communist, but the camps stripped away his faith in the Soviet system. In 1948, he was transferred to a special camp for scientists and engineers where conditions were less harsh. It was there that he began reflecting deeply on his life and on the human condition. His bitterness gave way to introspection. He realized his pride, selfishness, and complicity in the system he once supported. By the time of his release in 1953, Solzhenitsyn had found a deep, abiding faith in God. He would later write that prison stripped away his illusions and brought him closer to the truth about himself and the world. "Bless you, prison," he famously said, "for having been in my life." After his release, he was exiled to a remote village in Kazakhstan, where he worked as a teacher. During this time, he secretly began writing about his experiences in the camps. In 1962, his novella, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, was published, revealing the truth about the Gulag to the Soviet public for the first time. The book was a sensation, but it also made him a target of the Soviet authorities. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, Solzhenitsyn continued to write in secret, smuggling manuscripts out of the country. His famous work, The Gulag Archipelago, was a sprawling, deeply personal expose of the Soviet labor camp system. It was published in the West in 1973 and caused an international uproar. The Soviet government, furious and humiliated, declared him a traitor. In 1974, Solzhenitsyn was arrested and exiled from the Soviet Union. He settled in Vermont in the United States, where he continued to write and speak out against communism. For 2 decades, he lived a quiet life, raising his family and producing more works. In 1994, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Solzhenitsyn returned to Russia. He spent his later years reflecting on his homeland's history, culture, and spiritual future. Until his death in 2008, Solzhenitsyn remained a voice for truth, freedom, and faith. Through his life, faith shaped his resilience. Writing became his weapon against tyranny, and his works were rooted in suffering, redemption, and courage, and they changed the world. With no further ado, I'd like to bring on Professor Larry. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Travis. Good to hear you.
Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
I think you wrote a book that was kind of a sleeper on society. I mean, it's kind of every chapter I read, I put about 3 to 5 wows in the margins, and I say this is so prophetic every time. What these authors were saying 50 and 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I've discovered is that it's very hard for people to read these days. A lot of different things calling for their attention, and these writers, they reach you, but you need to have the time to contemplate what they're saying.
Yeah.
You need you need to be able to really give it the attention that they're asking from you. But once you give them the attention, boy, they pay you back in
Yeah.
like completely different ways of looking at the world, and confirmations of things you felt about yourself in the world that nobody else is confirming, and encouragements in these strange ways. So once I started writing it, I started with one chapter. I started with I wrote a essay for Christian Century on Solzhenitsyn back when I was in graduate school, and that was really the seeds of the whole thing, because Solzhenitsyn is kind of a model of somebody who forged a different way of looking at the world he was living in that was just totally antithetical to the Stalinist authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
And he paid a heavy price for it, but he ended up, winning the Nobel Prize and becoming a world famous writer. But even he, as famous as he is and was, people have a hard time reading because the Gulag, his masterpiece, is 3 volumes long.
Yeah.
And so if and there are alternatives. You can go online and there'll be somebody will summarize it in 15 minutes for you, or so they will say. And you'll say, well, gee, that wasn't all that great. The guy could summarize it in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But if you give yourself over to it, if you have the confidence that this is going to be worth the effort, uh, there'll there'll be passages that will just change your world. So once I found that in him, I figured, well, there's probably other Russian dissidents like him that I don't know anything about, or that nobody's told me about, that do a similar thing. Um, and so I started looking for them, and it took me back to the classic, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, but looking at them through new eyes, because I saw basically them in a new context. And that's what started it. And so then there were other Christian writers. I didn't, when Solzhenitsyn first came out, he wasn't really considered a Christian writer. He was considered an anti-Soviet dissident. He was a Soviet dissident who had a kind of high stoicism, somebody who survived these Russian prison camps in Siberia, and wrote about his experiences in those camps. But when I read it, I saw clearly this guy is a Christian. It was clear that this was stoicism at a higher level. I mean, that he he had a sense of the goodness of life in the midst of these prison camps, where he would see these people, turned into animals, and their captors, turned into worse animals. And he would see God working out his plan in him. And it was just mind blowing. It was.
Mm.
And I got to, before we leave today or tomorrow, whenever we tape these, um, there are a few passages I wanted just to read from him
Yeah.
as an example of the kind of thing these writers have to say that you don't hear very often for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about those reasons too. How the conversation about faith got taken over by theological issues as opposed to living faith uh, accounts and dialogue with the culture, which is really where it's at. You know,
Living faith accounts and dialogue with the culture rather
yeah.
than theological ghettos.
Right, right, and
And that's okay. You just nailed like why this book stood out to me. It's like, wow, none of these guys are arguing some minutia point about theology. This is more about just how to be a Christian in the world and how being a Christian critiques the world,
exactly.
and not so much in a condemning way, but more in a like just like honest way. Like what is good or bad about what is happening in the culture.
Yes, revelatory,
Yeah,
because that's one of the things they all share is that they convict themselves as much as they convict other people.
yeah.
Like when Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago. Let me just go there because since we brought him up, um, the way it's structured is it starts with his arrest, and then he tells you about his arrest, and then he tells you, then he stops, he just stops it there, and then he tells you about the rest of all his friends.
Yeah, the whole first chapter is called Arrest.
Yeah, and then the arrest of all the guys that he met later on in the prison camps, and then the history of arresting in the Soviet Stalinist fascist regime. And so you get like a whole chapter or two chapters just on the arrest, and then interrogation, the first interrogation he had, then all his interrogations, then the interrogations of all his friends, and then the interrogations of all the guys he met in the camp, and then the history of interrogations. And so that's why the thing is 3 volumes long.
Yeah,
But while you're reading it, there are these moments like uh, the time he got arrested. Let me just tell you this story because he got arrested, and he was fighting in World War II against the Nazis. He was an artillery captain. And they found in one of his letters, he said something insulting of Stalin. So they charged him with insubordination. And he said that he wasn't being insubordinate. He was just saying what it was like. So they said, well, okay, we're going to charge you with uh, treason or semi-treason or whatever it was they charged him. And they were going to send him to a re-education camp. But they didn't have a cell for him, so they wanted him to go home and come back tomorrow. So he's talking about walking home to his house, his apartment, and seeing all these people that are not going to go to prison tomorrow walking around. And he's thinking, do these people know they're free? Do they know that there are people walking among them who tomorrow they're going to be thrown into a prison camp? Uh, and why am I going to go back? It's stupid. I shouldn't go back. I should run away. Or if nothing else, I should get on the subway platform and start screaming. There's an injustice in this country. It's being run by this fascist authoritarian who calls himself the king of the people. How can you let this go? And then he says, of course, if I did that, nobody would have done anything. They would have just watched as the police put a handcuff on me and take me back to the station. I would have had my 2 seconds of pleasure acting out, being angry, but that's not good enough. And so, somewhere in my mind, I realized I needed to do something more. That my conscience told me I had to go through this in order to expose the lie of this entire system.
mm.
And to write the book that Pasternak never wrote, that he wanted to write, saying that the Russian people had been occupied by an alien political ideology. And unless they stood up and spoke back to their leaders, they were going to be subjugated to it, even if they won the war against the Nazis. So he ends up going back, and then that's when he's sent to a prison camp. And he wasn't a good prisoner. He talked back to the guards. He gave people crap. And so he kept getting sent to worse prisons. So they'd say, you talk back to me, we're going to send you to further east. And he'd say, screw you. And then they'd send him further east and further east. So finally, he got to the worst prison camp in the Gulag. And they were transporting him to the worst Gulag. And he said, I hear this is the worst Gulag you guys are sending me to. And he goes, yeah, this is the worst. Everybody says it. And he said, well, good, because now you have nothing over me anymore. What are you going to do to me? Yeah. I'm going to the worst prison camp. There's nothing you could do. But the part I wanted to read you one, I'm going on too long, so you could cut me when you want, Travis. But there's a quote here where he's in the train and he's going from one prison camp to the next. This is the only time he got among free people. And he's on the train and he's listening to people in the train, and everybody's arguing about stuff and complaining. And one guy's arguing that, telling his friend that they're sending him to this new job, and he's going to have to spend 3 weeks in Siberia every month or two, and what a pain it is. Someone else is complaining about the food on the train and the lack of effective heaters. And so he's being sent off, and he's listening to this, and he's thinking to himself, what would I tell these people about how lucky they are that they're not being sent into a prison camp? That having to take a job in a city you don't want for 2 weeks isn't the worst thing that could happen to a human being. And you shouldn't pollute the atmosphere of the train with all this bitching and moaning, right? Mm-hmm. So he writes this passage, well, what would I say to these people? I am going to finally tell them what I think of them and me and the world condition here when I get to write my book. But I can't write my book yet because I don't have any pencils or paper, or have to memorize these things. But when I finally do write the book, this is what I'm going to say in the book. So this comes across, I'm going to read this paragraph here. This comes across as stoic, but I think it's also sort of Christian stoicism, if there is such a thing, right? Which he makes clear in his later writings. So he says, how do you bring it home to them? By an inspiration, by a vision, a dream? Brothers, people, why has life been given you? In the deep, deaf stillness of midnight, the doors of the death cells are being swung open, and the great souled people are being dragged out to be shot. If you want, I'll spell it out for you right now. Now, this is what I love about this guy, right? He's not going to wane lyrical all the time. He's going to spell it out for you. Do not pursue what is illusory. Property and position, all that is gained at the expense of your nerves, decade after decade, and is confiscated in one fell night. Live with a steady superiority over life. Don't be afraid of misfortune and don't yearn for happiness. It is, after all the same. The bitter never lasts forever, and the sweet never fills the cup to overflowing. Rub your eyes and purify your heart and prize above all else in the world those who love you and wish you well. Do not hurt them or scold them, and never part with them in anger. After all, you simply do not know. It may be the last act before your arrest. But the
Yeah.
convoy guards stroke the black handles on their pistols in their pockets, and we sit there, three in a row, sober fellows, quiet friends.
That was in the book, right?
That's in the book. It's
Yeah.
well, I quote it. It's in the first volume of the Gulag Archipelago, and there's a funny moment. The guards are complaining to him, saying, you damn prisoners, you always, we have to send you to these worst camps. And we're the ones who end up riding in these trains for 25 hours out to Siberia. Um, and Solzhenitsyn says to the guys, how can you be complaining? You're the guys who are taking me to the prison and you're complaining. And they say, well, uh, you're free to have lunch. We can only eat. We can't drink or anything. So Solzhenitsyn orders himself a beer when the waiter goes by, and they can't stop him because they don't want people to know they're KGB. And so
Hmm.
he gets a beer, and they can't drink beer because they're on duty. So they have to watch him drink a beer. So he's thinking these thoughts about what he would say when he writes the great masterpiece that's going to make dialectical materialism obsolete as a world idea, and drinks his beer, imagining how great it's going to be when he finally gets his pencil and can write these things down.
That
And
is awesome.
it's so awesome and it's so inspiring because you're thinking there, you we have online all these, things about how to write, and books on how to write and brainstorming techniques and everything. And here's a guy, with he just had a story to tell and a faith to express, and he didn't have tricks of the trade. In fact, all that stuff was just more of the problem that he wanted to pierce with the truth of his experience.
Yeah.
And he does it, and he and then as the longer you read it, the more amazing it gets because this is just the beginning of the guy's life and story.
Yeah.
So he's an example.
One thing I was thinking is like everyone knows about the Holocaust. Like it happened to get like every movie made about it,
Hmm.
um, every book, every bit of awareness.
Hmm.
It's like the Russian gulags. This was almost like the first I've heard of it when I read your book.
Oh yeah,
And it's not like I didn't know the Nazis. I mean, not like I didn't know Stalin and them didn't
yeah.
kill millions of people. I found that out, later in life, though. It wasn't like in college or anything. I don't know. I don't know if no one was talking about it or what, but
Well, yeah. Well, the thing
it,
the thing about it is that people talked about it, but they talked about it in the abstract. It was sort of like the way we talk about prisoners in other totalitarian countries, or even in our own political prisoners and things. It it, uh, it seems abstract unless you're there, or someone who was there, or you get on the train with Solzhenitsyn and ride to the furthest camp in Siberia, and he takes you into the cells and what the people say and what they're experiencing. It
yeah,
it's you got to have that firsthand experience, and that's what happened with the Gulag Archipelago. Was he won the Nobel Prize in 1970? That's really early. I didn't realize it was that early. I didn't read him till much later either. And then when I read him, it was sort of like, uh, now everybody gets it. Now everybody gets what Holocaust this was too, um, and and it was all over. I mean, what is it? 19 years later, the Soviet Union falls. It just
Yeah.
the
It's
whole
it
communist
seems
world
it
collapsed.
seems to me like from like I got the Gulag on audiobook now, and I've been through the intro and the first chapter of Arrest.
Hmm.
And in the intro they talk about how various communist sympathizers couldn't really defend it anymore when they read it. They're like,
Yes.
we don't like this book, but now I can't change my mind. Now
Right.
it's like it exposed it even to themselves. Even the ones that were like, you know, defensive about it, once they read it, they were like, yeah, this is not going to work. Um, and furthermore, it seemed that the implications for the whole Soviet Union was just a matter of time once that book got out.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
did not want that book to get out. And it's kind of crazy to think that one guy kind of almost brought it down with a uh,
Yes.
pen and paper or pencil. And
Well, it's mythic.
I'm sure that's
Yeah.
an overstatement, but it's not far from it. It's not too much of an overstatement because it was so powerful.
Yeah.
It's such an exposure into such a secret world.
Yeah. And then the way, and the fact that he went into his own culpability of it, he didn't know about it either. He was a soldier on the front lines fighting the Nazis. He didn't know that half of the guys who should be fighting the Nazis were in prisons of their own country. It was bizarre. And then he
Yeah,
finds himself there, and it's like, oh my God, this is worse than I had imagined. Um, and and then his plan on how he was going to fight back by winning the Nobel Prize, because Pasternak won the Nobel Prize, but the Soviet regime wouldn't let him go to accept it and give the Nobel Prize acceptance speech, because they were afraid that Pasternak would expose the authoritarian regime, and Pasternak didn't go, and Solzhenitsyn decided he would win it, and he would write the book that would expose the Soviet system, and um, then he'd leave. Then he'd go west, because
yeah,
he couldn't live there anymore if he had exposed it that blatantly, which is what he did,
yeah,
which which is a story in and of itself.
yeah. In the book, you outline that how he was pretty much mad at how lame Pasternak was with his platform.
Well, yeah, when he won, he thought, well, now, gee, you should just go and give the speech and never come back, and you'd be the most famous writer in Russian history. But now I have to do it
Now
because,
that in and of itself would make an amazing movie.
yes, it would be. It would be.
The transition from Pasternak to Solzhenitsyn,
Yeah.
and what they saw and what they were writing about, and then their own personal the beef that he had, that Pasternak didn't have the courage to expose everything.
Well,
Uh,
it's interesting. You mentioned before I was, I'm interested in Thomas Merton. And in the 50s, Thomas Merton corresponded with Pasternak, because Pasternak had just written Dr. Zhivago,
yeah,
and it had come out, and it was a bestseller after the war. The English translation was a bestseller in '59, and Khrushchev had replaced Stalin, so Russia was beginning to thaw a little bit in terms of its authoritarian attitudes. They were wanting to be a little more democratic and compete with the West in cultural and in economic ways rather than in military ways. Although, it still was the heart of the Cold War. So Merton writes a letter to Pasternak telling him how much he liked Dr. Zhivago, but that the book would be misunderstood in the West because it's a it's a symbolically spiritual book. And if if I have one bit of advice about the response of the West to your book, it would be don't let them make it into a movie. Because if it becomes a movie, everything you say in that novel will be lost and turned into a love story.
And then they did?
And then they did.
That is so funny. Merton said that to him?
Yeah. And,
Wow.
and because Merton was corresponding with a Russian, the FBI thought he was corresponding with a communist. And so he got an FBI file.
Oh, wow.
So Merton's FBI file consists almost entirely of letters to writers, back and forth to writers, but primarily his letters to Pasternak and Pasternak's letters to him. And you can read them all now; they're all in print, and and they're funny because he tries to explain, that this is going to be put on screens. It's going to be made into a love story, and even if they make it a great love story, they'll miss everything you're talking about dissent against these authoritarian ignorances that are um, dumbing down our cultures and putting them against one another and ruining world civilization. And so they had common accord in their spiritual orientations, but uh, the movie was ultimately made. People still like it. I like the movie, but it's not half as good as the book.
Well, and it's probably
Yeah,
not what the book was supposed to be, right?
yeah, it wasn't what the book was. The book had a lot more passages like the one I read from Solzhenitsyn of a guy who supported the revolution being felt like he was betrayed when the Bolsheviks took over and turned it into an authoritarian regime. He thought he was overthrowing the czar to become a more democratic society and get rid of serfdom and all of that. And then it turns out that it was not that at all. It was, if anything, almost the opposite. And so that's the story you don't really see highlighted in the movie. That's part of that.
How did you kind of compile the other writers? Was it one by one, or did you kind of brainstorm who else would fit what you were thinking and what you even meant by subversive orthodoxy? Or did that name come later?
Well, that name came later. Uh, the word that the Soviets, the Marxist critics had for Solzhenitsyn was plebeian,
Oh yeah.
and and
Which I never quite knew what that word meant.
yeah, well, in the Marxist jargon, a plebeian was somebody who was working class, um, who had an understanding, a life understanding that the system was screwing him, but
Mm,
but lacked a political economic critique as to how to set it right. So the plebeian was sort of an uneducated
critic.
future Marxist, yes, uneducated critic who needed dialectical materialism to to see through the history that was oppressing him. And so that's what the communist revolutionaries were supposed to do, is educate the masses to their place in history. And the reason that the plebeians didn't pick up on this was because they were mostly religious.
Mm,
And religion, of course, for Marx was the opiate of the masses.
yeah.
But he meant that not necessarily in a bad way. There are other passages in Marx, where he says religion is the only thing answering the needs of the plebeians who realize that the system uh, that they're living in is oppressing them, but they don't know what to do. So it gives them the spiritual tools to survive it and to fight back if with virtue. And so when you read when I read Solzhenitsyn, I realized, well, he's not just fighting back with virtue; he's fighting back with a critique. And I think that's true of all progressive Christians. And a lot of them are what the Marxists would have called plebeians. They know that they need a change, but they're just not sure how to change it. But they're going to find out, like Solzhenitsyn did. And then I looked around, and there were a lot of them. There was like Martin Luther King, right? Progressive Christian, Gandhi, progressive Hindu, Lech Walesa, progressive Catholic, that was nevertheless also a plebeian, a worker who wasn't part of the Communist Party, didn't want to be part of the Communist Party, didn't think that a materialist understanding of the world would give him enough of an insight as to the way power was really being dispersed to really fight back effectively. So I went looking for those people. And my first book was I tried to get different religions. It was called The Ignorant Perfection of Ordinary People, because that's what the Marxists called the plebeians. They were perfect in their understanding of their place in history, but ignorant as to how to change it. But the people that were looking at were the religious people who said, well, religion also gives you a way of fight back. And virtue isn't as powerless as you think. Virtue is more powerful than you think.
That's
And
cool.
and so I had Gandhi. I had a chapter on Gandhi. I had one on Solzhenitsyn. I had one on Lech Walesa. I had one on Elie Wiesel in the prison camps. His Judaism fighting against the Nazis.
Yeah, I know
And,
that name.
yeah, and
I don't know how to say it as well as you.
yeah, yeah. I just with a V, like Simone Weil is with a V rather. It's a W, but there's a V sound.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I think when we go to bonus episodes and we get past the main book characters,
mhm.
I'd like to dig in on Simone Weil, Wiesel, and maybe there's a Frankel.
Oh yeah, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they wrote about the Holocaust, right?
yeah. But
That'd be
the
great if you know all those.
yeah,
You
but the
quote
subversive orthodox.
Simone Weil a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I like her. But she died when she was 34.
Well, other people, I wonder about you. If you know, like, I don't know if your scope is just everything or what, but
Right.
do you know Chesterton? I mean, you know
But
Chesterton, but I mean, I was gonna say Bonhoeffer,
oh,
and then Flannery O'Connor, and her contribution seems to be fit right in.
well, the subversive orthodoxy is all mostly Christian. I mean, it is all Christian. Uh, some people may quibble about the doctrines of some of these Christians, but all of them considered themselves Christian and were inspired by the Christian inspiration and revelation and messianic promise, and they were all looking at the modern world through the eyes of faith and saying that the materialist perspective on existence doesn't give you enough of a I'll use this word again because I've used it a lot today. Fight back that
Yeah,
isn't that isn't violent. It's understanding, how you can fight back with truth and with courage, and not necessarily become like your oppressor. The the model of Christian nonviolent resistance is powerful. But then, with Solzhenitsyn, it's different. It's the fight back of truth teller, of saying truth to power and winning the Nobel Prize and redoing philosophy and rethinking, helping people rethink their place in the world. That's powerful too.
Yeah.
And I do have a great quote from Bonhoeffer that I took out today that I was going to read if you wanted me to do the intro. But just to get on tape, because who knows if we'll ever get other things. I wanted to read you this quote because this is from Bonhoeffer, his letters from prison, which is even better than his cost of discipleship, especially if you know Solzhenitsyn's story. Bonhoeffer was in a Nazi prison, and so he's writing this to his friend, and they're talking about how do you minister to a world come of age, which from their point of view was, how do you give homilies or sermons to a world that has seen the triumph of Adolf Hitler, because they were still in the war, and there was no guarantee that Germany wouldn't win the war. In fact, some people even in the West put their money on him, and there were German historians, philosophers saying that Hitler was the next step in world history. And that so Bonhoeffer and is writing these letters. What I sort of like that question that Solzhenitsyn asked himself. What would you say to these people if you could? What would you say? So this is at the end of one of his letters, and he says, "This is Dietrich Bonhoeffer from the letters from prison. Living unreservedly in life's duties, problems, successes and failures, experiences, and perplexities. In so doing, we throw ourselves completely into the arms of God, taking seriously not our own sufferings, but those of God in the world, watching with Christ in Gethsemane. That, I think, is faith. That is metanoia. And that is how one becomes a Christian." Now, that's a nice epigram for these figures, because I would say very few of them, maybe one or two, are really academic theologians. I mean, they're
I
all,
could tell you. I could tell you who is the academic I didn't connect with.
yeah,
Fry.
yeah,
When I looked at videos of all these people, they all
yeah,
very engaging, and Fry is about as boring as you can get.
yeah. That's
So I would
that's.
never have discovered Fry without you.
Well, that I saw an interview with Fry one time with Bill Moyers, and Bill Moyers, thought he was great because he was the one. Moyers did all those interviews with Joseph Campbell, right? So he's trying to get Northrop Frye to be as engaging as Joseph Campbell, but he's not. He's just this boring guy, and he's sort of explaining his ideas. And at one point, the Moyers is trying to get him to speak out, and so he says, well, you tell us in your books, you tell us that literature is deeply involved in history. What can you tell us about the role that literature plays in history? Tell us about that. And Fry says to him, well, what is history but the phantasmagoria of the human imagination? And that's it. That was his answer.
Sounds about right.
And then you got with Solzhenitsyn, it's live with a steady superiority over life. Look these bastards in the eye. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your problems are your courage. And all this inspirational stuff. And then you get these guys that are saying very similar things, but Fry, but in a very bookish way. And so
Fry will be a comedy episode for me.
Yeah, that's right.
This is the quintessential professor guy.
Yeah.
Like an SNL skit character.
Yeah. I gave a series of talks one time at the Cornerstone Festival in Bushnell, Illinois, the Cornerstone Music Festival, 250 Jesus rock bands.
Oh yeah.
It ran for about 25 years.
Yeah, I had friends that used to go there.
Yeah, and they had a counterculture tent, and they would bring in guys who'd written books like mine and talk about things. And so I was in the counterculture tent for 5 days, and I gave an hour a day, and I had to explain to them what this was all about. So I have some riffs on how they all fit together, but. It was so funny because I met some of the most interesting people in the world in those little corn fields that were all cut down to make room for like 50 stages for all these, every high school Jesus band, every top singer. It was just something else. It was amazing place. Yeah. But anyway. Great talking to you.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, Travis. Great talking to you soon.
Bye. Bye-bye. There's something here for all of you, whether you're a skeptic or a believer or somewhere in between with some deconstruction journey. We're going to be exploring what this means to have a life of deep meaning in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and dealing with nihilism. We hope you'll join us on this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with anyone who might find these conversations meaningful.
Spiritually, I want to jump off a cliff without a parachute like I'm high on cannabis and skip through fields naked like I wonder if I could drift or if I could drift through it. Dancing through moonlight under nighttime skies.
This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchasti.
Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen. Grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills after a rain, after some pain, after the same, I'm to blame. Love in my veins through syringes untamed. Like dosage doesn't matter, inject these veins. People got problems in the